What is up, guys? Thank you all for watching this NBA Draft Lottery reaction. I'm EJ. I'm joined by Kendall. So, Kendall, we finally know the 14 teams in the order they'll be drafting in the draft lottery this upcoming NBA draft. Minnesota got lucky securing the number one pick. Kendall, give me your initial reactions to what transpired during the lottery.
Obviously, EJ, shout out to the Minnesota Timberwolves for getting that number one pick. When we mentioned you mentioned our preview when we did our preview, we mentioned that the Minnesota Timberwolves were a team that could get the number one pick, given that they're going to have new ownership. Glenn Taylor selling the team. They seemed like a team that the basketball gods would now decide, let's give them a number one pick. They haven't had one since Karl-Anthony Towns. So shout out to them, but it's definitely an interesting outcome because it's funny because, in our preview I said they're probably the least interesting outcome, which makes them the most interesting outcome because they were the team I kind of did not consider. They were the team I did not think about because, you think about Karl-Anthony Towns, you have D'Angelo Russell. You feel like whoever they draft with this pick is going to be a complementary piece next to those two guys, which may not be the most exciting for people that want to see these guys kind of in a evaluation standpoint. But from a development standpoint, it actually may be great for whoever the guy is that gets drafted at number one. I feel like all these guys are in play outside of James Wiseman. I don't think James Wiseman really makes any sense in Minnesota, but Edwards, Ball, Denny Avdia, Isaac Okoro, Killian Hayes. I wouldn't say Killian Hayes because of the D'Angelo Russell factor, but there are a lot of guys, point being, that I think certainly would fit in Minnesota next to Towns and Russell because they're pretty much a blank canvas. They gave up a lot to get Russell. They have Towns. They drafted Culver last year, and outside of that, there's not a whole lot there. So there's a lot of room for improvement in this Minnesota team.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I may feel the opposite in regards to feeling so much like a blank canvas because look, we're in an NBA draft where there are point guards who are slotted to go high. There's at least one center that's expected to go high in Wiseman. The kid from USC, Big O, he can end up going very high as well. And this is a team that has an all-star caliber point guard, D'Angelo Russell, who they just traded for, who is best friends with the franchise center in Karl-Anthony Towns. You would think that point guard and center is not really going to be on the table. We saw Golden State try to do the experiment of moving Russell to the 2. That did not go very well. I can't anticipate they're going to do that kind of same thing again, though who knows if they really fall in love with one of these guards, if they fall in love with a LaMelo Ball, maybe they make that run. I can't see them doing that. And then you throw in Jared Culver, and he kind of makes things interesting too. I know on the broadcast, they kind of made the case for Anthony Edwards. I kind of feel like just on the surface, just an initial reaction, he seems to be a guy that probably would fit in terms of just inserting someone in the starting lineup. You have Russell, you have Culver playing the 3. He could play the 1. He could play the 2. Edwards, and then you have Towns at the 5, and whoever the 4-man is, you figure that out. But that seems to be the initial spot if you're trying to get someone to come in and play right away and make an impact. But it's an interesting team in the sense that they had a terrible season, but when you have 2 foundational pieces, there's optimism that maybe this could be a short build. That this may not be a team that you're looking at and saying, okay, this is going to take 4 or 5 years before they're playoff contenders, kind of like what we've seen with the Phoenix Suns. This looks like a team that maybe, in a year or two, maybe they're right back in the playoff picture, assuming, Russell and Towns, none of those guys leave town, no pun intended. They could be right back in the mix. So that, to me, is an interesting thing with the Timberwolves because they're going to number one pick on a team that already has some star power. When it comes to some of the other winners of this draft, Kendall, obviously with Chicago and Charlotte moving up, that's a huge situation and a huge win for those teams. Those are 2 teams I feel like that have been stuck drafting in like the worst parts of the lottery.
They were 7, 8, 9 every year.
Yeah, so. The Bulls were just a 7th pick since like 1998. It feels like.
Yeah.
And then Charlotte also always kind of between 14 and like 9. Like they never were near the top end. I think the last really high pick they had was probably Cody Zeller. So they're due for this. These teams were due for this kind of jump. Charlotte is Charlotte's fascinating because they're a mess. They really don't have any. They have some good young players. Let me first start. Like I think Miles Bridges showed some good things this year. I think that Washington was underrated as one of the best rookies in this class. But in terms of a star or a player you feel like can blossom into a star, it doesn't appear like that's on the roster. So them jumping into the top three has got to be very exciting for that franchise and that fan base because you just lost Kemba Walker, a max player, all-star caliber player. The hope is that you can now replace him with a star player. And I know they do have Devontae Graham, who's really kind of like a scoring guard. I don't know if you call him a point guard. And they do have Terry Rozier, who they did just sign, who is a point guard. But if you're trying to get star power at that position, maybe this is where they find that Kemba replacement at point. But who knows? They can go a lot of places because they don't have any spot, I feel like, that is just like great. I probably wouldn't go with a small ball four again, considering you got Bridges and Washington. That's probably off the table. So I don't know how interested they'd be in someone like Avdia. But I think everyone else is possible, which makes them an interesting
Obi Toppin isn't going to be in the picture. Avdia,
no, I mean unless they think he's a 5. I mean, I could see some teams looking at him saying he's our center in this NBA. I don't know if I'd try that and say that that's where I'm going, but I could see teams going with it. I mean, Brandon Clark was the backup 5 for
Brandon
Memphis.
Clark is an elite defensive player, which Obi Toppin has never been confused.
That's true, but Toppin, but he is also an elite athlete, and Toppin and Clark athletically are comparable. I don't think he's as athletic as Clark, but he's very athletic.
Yeah. I mean, he's long arms, solid rim protector. I mean, look, I'm not putting anything past
Michael Jordan.
But I wouldn't drive Obi Toppin. Right. But, look, I think Wiseman could be an interesting fit there. You mentioned they don't really have a true 5. Bismack Biyombo, I believe, is a free agent. And honestly, I don't think that would stop them from drafting Wiseman anyway.
No doubt.
And look, I think LaMelo Ball, don't, discount the LaMelo Ball, Michael Jordan factor. I feel like he would be one of the guys that would, pound the table to try and get LaMelo Ball more than maybe some other GMs and other owners. So,
what do you think Michael Jordan thinks of LeVar Ball?
Say that again?
What do you think Michael Jordan thinks of LeVar Ball?
I think Michael Jordan, I think he certainly probably respects his business acumen and his ability to create a narrative and a story. I'm sure. I think he's probably been quoted in talking about LeVar Ball, but it's obviously LeVar is taking his shots at Jordan, but I think that they could get along similarly to how Magic and LeVar did. For that short period of time before.
I just think it's interesting because when you look at the other winner with the Bulls, to me, with Minnesota having Russell, with the Warriors having Steph and Clay, Ball, unless someone jumps to 2 that really loves Ball, and that could happen. But if that doesn't happen, it appears that Ball's spot looks like it begins at 3 and 4. And if I'm LeVar and everything that he's been about in terms of branding and marketing, there's no way in hell I'm letting him go to Charlotte when Chicago is right behind him. So I'm wondering what kind of gamesmanship we have. Because I agree. I think LaMelo is the kind of raw talent that Michael Jordan would absolutely want to have. I think that Michael Jordan's always gravitated to those kind of players.
Jordan. Sometimes Jordan, whatever he likes, it changes every. One year he loves, Michael Kidd Gilchrist, and the next he likes Frank Kaminsky. So I never know.
But I think with Jordan to me likes what I've seen is he always seems to draft well-known players.
Yeah, star power is definitely always.
Yeah, there's star power, like you being able to prove that you could perform on a high level with a sense of pressure. I think he respects. I've seen it with every single guy he's drafted. I think.
Yeah, recently. I
think even Cody Zeller to me and Kaminsky fall in that same line. Those are guys that played at big programs. Kaminsky went to a national championship game. It might have been national player of the year. If he wasn't, he was a Big Ten player of the year. like high profile guys. I think Jordan respects that because I think he looks at guys. He wants big game players. So to me, Ball I think fits in that same line. Like, this is a guy who's been a prodigy since he was 15. Everybody knows who he is. He's a big star. Jordan seems to love that kind of thing. So I feel like Ball would fit in that aspect, but I don't know if, again, to me, I think you'll see a lot of gamesmanship potentially with LeVar trying to get Melo to Chicago. That's a much better situation. They have a much better roster. The franchise is also a mess. Like, I get that, but they do have at least new leadership, so there's some hope with that. So that's going to be, I think that's going to be an interesting thing. See how that goes down between 3 and 4.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of players who are going to try to stay the hell away from Charlotte, and they're going to try to get themselves to Chicago.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree. Although Chicago's interesting because they kind of have a nice, decent rotation of guys anyway.
You would think that playing time, depending on your position, you would think playing time based on your position may not be as available. I think, so that's a good point.
Yeah, if you're a star guy like LaMelo, like, yeah, you'd rather be in Chicago. But, if you're a guy that's more worried about, getting numbers and you feel like I may get lost in the shuffle there, Charlotte may be a great spot for you to show out and win 20 games. Now, we spoke a lot about the Bulls in our preview show, what they could do, but where are you looking at when it comes to the teams that have lost? The teams that we thought were hoping to get the number 1 pick that ended up at 8 potentially.
Yeah. Let's get to the elephant in the room. So the New York Knicks. This was a disastrous night. There's no way to say it.
His face. Wow.
I didn't even see. Gotta be honest, I didn't even see his face because I was so distraught. I wasn't paying attention. I don't like. I blacked. I saw the Knicks. I saw the Knicks logo show up, and I blacked out. I don't even know what happened in the media, so I gotta look it up. I didn't know what Leon Rose looked like.
Leon Rose's face, he looked like he saw a ghost, man. I've never, like, we have all the memes and the jokes about Leon Rose being a mob boss and this, that, and the other. That looks like Kingpin. It looked like somebody told Wilson Fisk that Spider-Man stole something from him. That's how upset he looked. But no, yeah, it was a tough night. It was a tough night.
Yeah, it was a tough night for the Knicks. Now, it was a tough night. There's no question about that. Here's where, if there's any silver lining, I know there are some Knicks fans that will be like, what are you talking about? There's no silver lining. Everything's terrible. Yeah, everything is kind of terrible. This is not the night you wanted. But here's what I will say. The Knicks need a point guard. That is undeniable. That's what they need. I feel like... Right, and I feel like besides... I really like Killian Hayes. But besides Ball, I feel like drafting any other point guard in the top 4 may feel like a risk and may feel like a reach. If there's any consolation to going to 8 is, well, I feel like the guys that are going to be talked about at 8 make more sense. We thought the Knicks have been connected to Cole Anthony since he committed to North Carolina. And whenever I heard them talking about him, I'm like, the Knicks move up to 4, he shouldn't be even in the conversation of a player they should be drafting. At 8, well, that's a different spot. And I'm willing to have that conversation about Cole Anthony. I think his last year was completely decimated by injury. No, Halliburton. But I know you like Cole Anthony. I'm a little skeptical because the tape was the tape. I think he was hurt. So that's where it's tough because it's like, how do I now judge a guy based off of just what he was in high school? Halliburton, again, draft him at 3 or 2 or 4. That's a tricky thing. If you don't get LaMelo and you got to sell for another point guard, there are a lot of other, I think, skilled players. I think a Toppin, I think an Avadia, I think there are other guys I would take over a point guard in those positions. Now you're at 8. It's like, well, the point guards are there. So you're going to be able to get the point guard if that's what you really, really want. It's frustrating, though, because I feel like while point guard is their biggest hole, I felt like there were players that, regardless of fit, I thought really the Knicks could have targeted near 6 and between 4 and 6. I thought like Toppin, Avdia. I thought that those were guys that if you were a Knicks fan, there was reason to be excited about. The fact that you fell so far that now even those guys look like they're not even attainable. It's like, okay, It's a tough
Yeah.
night. It's a tough night for the Knicks. There's no doubt about that
So
to me.
obviously we're gonna get into the Knicks plenty in the
Yeah,
near
of course.
future, but um, the one thing that comes to mind with me initially with this is, first of all, you gotta hope that Onyeka Okongwu gets drafted before you're up to select, because he's not a guy, as we mentioned with Jonathan Macri
Right.
in our last video about the Knicks. He's not really a guy that the Knicks are gonna look at. I mean,
Yeah, he's not on their board because there's no
he could,
there's
but
no reason to draft
ideally
him.
he's probably not on your board. So if he goes in the top 7, which is very possible,
Mm-hmm.
that slides down someone that you probably will be considering. Because of all the guys that are going to be in the top 9 or 10, which I think that there is a solid tier of about a top 9 or 10 in this draft, where it's like, all right, everyone in this top 9 or 10 will probably go anywhere between 1 and 11. There may be a couple guys that sneak into the top 9 or 10, but for the most part, the cutoff point is basically Cole Anthony. Around that Cole Anthony range of this guy could go anywhere from 8 to 10, 8 to 11. If Onyeka Okongwu goes higher than 7, or higher than 8, then that certainly helps the Knicks. I think. Look, I love Cole Anthony's game. I think he got hampered by his year at North Carolina. Awful situation, no spacing, nobody in that team could shoot. It was not a talented team, and he was dealing with injuries. But this isn't an episode about Cole Anthony. We may have that in the future. On the Knicks, I think, look, you have plenty of point guard options. You mentioned Halliburton, or I don't know if you did mention Halliburton, but you have Tyrese Halliburton.
I did.
Yeah, you've got Cole Anthony. You've got potentially Killian Hayes, like you mentioned. Maybe even Tyrese Maxey, if you like Tyrese Maxey.
Mm-hmm.
I like Theo Maledon. 8 may seem like a reach, but could you trade down? I know a lot of people like Kyra Lewis, Nico Mannion, RJ Hampton's plenty of point guards. Now, I'm not sure you're drafting any of those guys at 8, but they've got other picks. If they want to trade down, if they want to get another pick, the Knicks have options. I personally would not look at anyone that's not a point guard, or unless it's somebody that you really feel is an impact player. I mean, I think even Tyrell Terry is a guy Knicks going to have a conversation about. I know 8 may seem like a reach, but...
Or Knicks also have the 27th pick, so I don't know if they should be reaching for guys that maybe they could move up just a couple of spots from 27 to get to.
I can tell you this now, and maybe I'll be wrong, but I can't envision him going past 17, and I think the Celtics will take a look at him. I think, and he's not really slotted to go in the top 10 now, but I think once teams start to get closer to the draft, I think the shooting aspect of what he brings to the table and the Trae Young factor, the Dame Lillard factor will start to kick in, and people will look at this guy and be like, wow, we have to look at Tyrell Terry. So I think the Knicks will look at him as well. But I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't look at Devin Vassell. I wouldn't look at Patrick Williams from Florida State.
No, the only wing player to me, and again, I don't want to go too much in Knicks, so we have some other stuff for the people coming down the pipe in terms of more draft content. But the only wing guy I'm really seriously considering that's like a 2-3 is Okoro, because Okoro he's a monster.
Aaron Nesmith is a sniper, so
he can shoot the rock, so it may be him, because he could play some 3 next to RJ maybe, but all these other guys, I'm not considering Bay, I'm not considering Vassell. To me, you got to go away from that. If I'm gonna get a wing guy, he's gonna have some size. He's got to be just a force of nature, like Okoro, or like you said with Nesmith, he's got to be a sniper. The other team that also had a really bad night was the Atlanta Hawks, and the Cavs. Hawks and Cavs both rough nights for them. I mean, the Hawks, they were a team that you could argue, okay, they got some talent, so they could probably afford to drop, but the ability to maybe be drafting 2 or 3 had to be really exciting for that team, considering they do have some really exciting young talent. Now drafting at 6, is it kind of you just throwing in another young player trying to figure it out in the NBA with your other young players trying to figure it out in the NBA, as opposed to getting a guy who comes in and can ball out right away?
Yeah, I mean, the Hawks got screwed over because, again, I think if you're looking at all the guys in the top 5, Edwards was the only guy that made any sense for the Atlanta Hawks. Now that you're at 6, I think there are some guys that you can look at and say could be decent fits. Again, you're not talking about anyone who's going to have the impact necessarily of Anthony Edwards. But Isaac Okoro. I mentioned that Anthony Edwards in our preview is from Atlanta. So is Isaac Okoro. So, obviously you drafted DeAndre Hunter last year. You drafted Cameron Reddish last year. So obviously you already drafted 2 wings, but as we see with the Celtics, you can never have too many good young wings. So we drafted Romeo Langford last year, and he's playing actually pretty decent in the playoffs. So along with guys like Tatum and Brown. So I think a guy like Isaac Okoro playing next to Reddish and playing next to DeAndre Hunter and obviously Herter and Young in the backcourt could be enticing, and I think Denny Avdia could be an interesting fit there as well. And then Big O, if they go with the young big man option. Cleveland, I think they're the biggest loser of this lottery, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
Because you talked about it with the Knicks. When you're in that top 4 range, there aren't too many point guards available. So you're like, all right, if you're the Knicks, you're like, all right, we dropped, but at least we still get a point guard. The Cavs don't need a point guard.
But all they have is point guards.
All they have is point guard. So they needed to be in the top 4 because the further back from that, the more the options at the table are only point guards.
Right.
They're not drafting Cole Anthony. They're not drafting Killian Hayes. They're not drafting Tyrese Halliburton. They're not drafting Tyrese Maxey. Like, you could just half of the Knicks board is not even available for the Cavs. So now you're gonna have to either reach for a guy or you have to draft a guy that you may not even want, because the guy that they really want, James Wiseman, probably James Wiseman would be at the top of their list, but Anthony Edwards as well. I think the guy that they're going to focus on is Obi Toppin early on. Again, we'll have a video out on the Cavs later, but Obi Toppin seems like the one guy where you're like, Dayton, they need a big, a guy that comes with a pedigree of being one of the best players in college basketball last year, gives him like you mentioned in our last video, a bubble-ready player, a guy can come in, step in right away, and be a contributor. Obi Toppin seems to be the guy I would target if I was Cleveland. I think it's a match made in heaven. Not the biggest Obi Toppin fan myself, but being a local guy out there, Dayton, always from New York, certainly would be enticing, I think, for the Cleveland Cavs.
Yeah, I think Toppin makes sense potentially. I think Okoro could make sense because they need a guy also who comes in who comes in, plays hard with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder.
The problem with Okoro is he feels a lot like a role player, at least initially. And
I would argue though, Kendall, real quick, I would argue that
teams just don't have the impact. Like, I would love to see Okoro on a team that he doesn't have to do that much. But I feel like anybody that gets drafted in Cleveland needs to kind of come in right away.
But I think Cleveland is a little different, Kendall, because Cleveland, while yes, they need immediate star power, immediate guys get buckets. Okay, if that's not available, they need somebody that's going to come in and play hard and come in with a chip on their shoulder and bring some nasty. Like, they were a team to me that too often last season just didn't really conduct themselves as a professional NBA basketball team. They didn't play hard enough. They didn't prepare hard enough in some instances. They just weren't ready for prime time, and I think a lot of it came down to a lot of their young players still not really understanding what the NBA was all about and what it means to compete in a night in, night out basis. So, okay, if you can't get that elite star guy, give me a guy who's going to come in. I know day one is going to want to work for everything he can possibly earn. And Okoro, I think, comes in and he could be the beginning of a culture change. Because that team, they just weren't. I don't think they were tough enough, quite frankly. I think that they weren't tough enough, and Okoro brings them a level of toughness that I don't care what you think his ceiling is. That's the kind of guy they need in their locker room. I don't care if he's their rookie. So that's why I think he could fit. But yeah, Cleveland, really tough spot there because now they may be in a position where they're looking at a lot of point guards, and if Avdia and Okoro and Toppin are gone, oh boy. I mean that, because that's possible. You know what I'm saying? Especially considering so many of these top teams won't be looking at point guards. It could be a serious problem for them. So yeah, they had a rough night, but it's gonna be interesting, man. The lottery always kind of crystallizes things, but sometimes it complicates things as well. And I think that was another thing that happened. One last thing, Kendall.
Yeah, one last thing. I didn't mention this on the T-Wolves, and we'll talk more about the T-Wolves, obviously. If you haven't figured out, we're gonna have a series on certainly all these lottery teams and probably more. So stay on the lookout for that. But it well, the one last thing I want to mention on the T-Wolves is we didn't mention any possibility of them trading the pick, which I think is very possible.
You do think it's very possible?
Yeah, I mean, I look. If you would have told me that the T-Wolves were going to get the number 1 pick before the NBA restart, I would have said, "Wow, I hope Devin Booker likes Minnesota." But now with the way the Suns played, I don't know if Devin Booker's still going to be on the table. But I think that they're going to go star hunting. Do Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell strike you as the type of guys right now that want to play with a 19-year-old?
No,
I don't know.
Not at all.
Yeah,
they don't.
Not at all. You know, these guys haven't really competed for a championship, or haven't competed for a championship. Barely have competed for playoff spots in their careers. I think these guys want to win right away, so I think they're going to try and probably push Gerson Rosas to make a move to get them somebody that could help. If it's Devin Booker, great. If they can go after Donovan Mitchell, great. Well, you've got Jared Culver, you've got the number 1 pick, you've got pieces. Not a whole lot, but you have some pieces. I would make that move, but we'll talk more about that when time permits.
For sure, yeah. I think that's a good point about the T-Wolves, maybe looking at the trade market. But that's going to do it for this NBA draft lottery reaction, recap, whatever you want to call it. Thank you guys so much for checking in on this content we've been dropping with this NBA draft lottery stuff. Of course, you can catch all of our content on New Generation Media YouTube channel right here. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like this video. We got plenty of other draft content coming on the way. We also cover other sports. We also cover superhero news. And we also cover Star Wars stuff. So right here, make sure you keep it locked in. New Generation Media. Subscribe right now. If you haven't done it already, make sure you do it. Also, be sure to check out our podcasts, New Generation Podcast Network. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We do New Generation Sports Talk, where we're talking sports every week. We got New Generation Hero Talk, where we're talking superheroes every week. We got Star Wars Podcast, Imperial Broadcast. And, of course, as you guys know, if you've been on this YouTube channel, The Uncommitted, which is not only a podcast that we put on this YouTube channel in its totality, but we also obviously post it on our podcast network. Once again, you can search us on all those platforms, New Generation Podcast Network. Follow me on social media, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram. Thank you guys so much for watching. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.